and welcome to the NeuroCyber Neurodiversity 101 series. Today we're talking to Dr. Sam Healy, who will introduce herself and then talk about the topic for today. Welcome, Sam.
Hi, Nick. Thank you very much for the invitation to come and talk today. So as Nick says, my name's Sam Healy. I'm Director of Corporate Responsibility and Sustainability at Qinetiq, and I'm responsible for setting the strategy and delivering our responsible and sustainable business programs. And that ranges from ethics and reporting to community and environment. And I'm also responsible for diversity and inclusion. So if you don't know Qinetiq, we are a science and engineering company. We operate primarily in the defence and security and critical infrastructure markets. There are nearly 7,000 of us now, and we're based in the UK, US, Australia and Europe. And today in my session, I'm going to share with you our feelings around the power of inclusion, why we think it's so important, and a focus on neurodiversity, how that factors in our D&I strategy. So my starting point is really to think about why we believe that diversity and inclusion is so important for organisations, and now more than ever. And what I've got on the screen here, I think, is just some examples of the benefits that embracing inclusion, creating that inclusive culture and valuing diversity can bring to your organisation. And it can be from being more resilient, more successful at innovation, around growth, adapting to change, market share, all really positive elements for any organisation to reap those benefits from. And there's loads of compelling evidence and fantastic reports that explain this. But I think also on a personal level, when you think about this as an employee of an organisation, is feeling included, feeling that you are valued for who you are, is so vital to your productivity and to your engagement that you can see that side of it as well. And I've put now more than ever, because I think there are two driving factors to why inclusion is so critical to organisations now. I think firstly is the pandemic. And I think over the last year, we have all had to work differently, think differently about how we engage with colleagues, in how we work together. And I think the lessons that we've learned from that process will really be what drives the way we work in the future. And then I think the second aspect is around some other external drivers, what's expected from investors and what we're seeing from customers. And I think from the investor community, it's really clear that there is an aspect of your organisation where you are creating this culture that investors can see the benefit, that can see the benefit to your organisation. And from a customer side, particularly for those of us who work for government customers, we're seeing aspects such as social value being woven now into contracts and formal requirements for diversity and inclusion to be built into contracts. So these are very strong drivers, and why we believe that taking diversity and inclusion seriously is really important. So this slide just shows an overview of Qinetiq's business strategy. And as you'd expect with any strategy, it's got our vision, what we're here to do and our purpose, and how we articulate that through our mission-led innovation and focus around customers. But you'll see at the bottom, the foundation stone for our strategy is around a high-performance inclusive culture. And we recognise for our strategy to be successful, we need not just the what, so that piece around innovation or distinctive offerings, but we also need the how. That how of what we operate as through our strategy is just going to be critical to how we're able to deliver. And I think if you look at just one example, innovation is such a fundamental part of Kinetics' heritage. It's core to our strategy, it's critical to our future success. And when you think about innovation, you think about it's finding the new and the better. There's no one right way of achieving it, from that eureka moment that sparks revolution to steady evolution of process. But what we do know about innovation is it's more likely to be successful if we create an environment and culture where we all feel welcome to contribute our ideas. And I think also where we can collaborate with different people with different ways of thinking is also critical to innovation. And if this is something that interests you, and it certainly interests me, I can't recommend too highly the book Rebel Ideas by Matthew Syed. It's a fantastic description of that link between valuing diversity and inclusion and innovation. So I think hopefully you can see there that Qinetiq believes that an inclusive culture is critical to strategy. And underpinning that, we have our Inclusion 2025 programme, which we developed in 2019, and we're now in the embedding phase of rolling this out. And this is how we are working towards reaching that high performance inclusive culture. And what we believe, we're fundamentally a people business, is that we just need to create that workplace that's inclusive, and we're looking to embrace difference to make us stronger and better. And I think this busy slide shows that really there's no silver bullet to creating an inclusive culture. But I consider that to be a positive, because what it does mean is that you can build inclusion into everything that you do. It's almost like a golden thread. So as you're thinking about ways of working or reporting or resourcing or mentoring, you're thinking about how can we make this inclusive? And for us, we're running programs in all of those areas. You know, we are on a journey to work towards an inclusive culture. So we know that there's some way to go. We're making progress. And across this, we have 3 cross-cutting themes around awareness campaigns, around leadership, and around mobilising our people. And I think that's something that I'll touch on in through this conversation. So how does neurodiversity fit into this? A few years ago, when I was developing our strategy, I was fortunate enough to attend an event chaired by Mike Spain from Atkins. And Mike had brought together people from across the cyber sector to talk about how important neurodiversity is to our organisations, how important it is to value it and celebrate it, and how we work better together to understand and share with our organisations. And I was so struck by this conversation because as I was developing my strategy, a lot of what I was reading was, the importance of gender balance and LGBT, and clearly those are important. But there was a lot less conversation around neurodiversity, and yet we'd been having it as an organisation. And I just really felt that for us to be successful in our strategy, this was something that we were going to have to build in right from the very start, and also to retain our relationship and continue to work with Mike, and more on that in a bit. So I just want to touch on raising awareness. Now, I believe that to drive change, to create that culture, you need to create information so that people can understand what you're trying to achieve, to understand and create that knowledge and skills that allows them to be transformation agents. And many aspects of diversity and inclusion may be really obvious to people, but some aspects may not. So it's really key that we focus on that mindset, that skill set, that tool set to empower people to drive change individually. So we run regular campaigns, and like most organisations, we have an intranet, and we post stories, and we'll do sort of broad cross-cutting stories around, big themes, and then we might do a deep dive on a particular topic. And so here you can just see 2 examples. We held a focus around World Dyslexia Day, and we also did a broader story later in the year around neurodiversity more generally. And I think what's great about our intranet stories, and it's not the only way of reaching people, obviously there's lots of different channels that you can use, is that opportunity for people to comment and for other people to see those comments, to read them and to add to those comments. And so it actually becomes a bit of a conversation. And I think the dyslexia one specifically genuinely struck a chord. What we were trying to do was explain, create some understanding around what it was. And there was a story posted on the internet, which really moved me actually, which said that someone wrote that Qinetiq was the first employer that they'd ever admitted that they were dyslexic. And that was after 16 years of working in the sector of people who were less supportive. And they said they were proud to work for a company with people who wanted to understand and view difference positively. And for other people to read a comment like that, I think is really powerful. And I think this is why these awareness campaigns can be really useful, that you're not just giving facts and information, you're creating narrative and personal stories where individuals who are able to share their lived experience of what it means to be dyslexic, what it means to be dyslexic in Qinetiq, and can share that experience. So it's definitely worth, I think, putting these kind of campaigns in place. What we also do is create resources, and we've done quite a lot of research around dyslexia. And again, it was just to support that campaign, which was to look at aspects of dyslexia where some simple changes that you can make can really support colleagues. And when we were doing this research, I think what was so striking for me was many of those small changes that you can make around font or about the way that you engage are actually better for everybody. And I think this has been a key tenet for what we're talking about with inclusion, is that when you make changes for an organization and you understand people's needs and their preferences, actually what you do is you create opportunities for other people to thrive and be more successful. We also have what we call a resource hub, and we've set it up like a wiki, which means that lots of people can contribute. And as you can see, it's the picture on the right-hand side. We've got a number of topic areas, and people add the articles they've read, the YouTube videos, the blogs that we've had. And I think, again, this is really powerful because, A, it's a shared endeavour. So people are sharing that opportunity just to share stories of what they've seen, what they've liked, what they've enjoyed. But also it recognises that we all have different ways of learning and absorbing information. So, I'm quite old school. I like a bit of chalk and talk. If somebody learned tells me some stuff, I'm writing notes and I read and absorb it. Other people will like a podcast or a webinar or short bite-sized chunks of emails. So again, I think these are really, really helpful to raise awareness, because what they do is they give people time to go and find stuff out, small bite-sized chunks of information. And I think with most of us with our learning is often it's little and often, or small facts that you can build up your learning, which I think is really powerful. We also have what we call lunch and learn. I know other people call it brown bag sessions or bite-sized learning. And these are discussion sessions. So, you can go away and do some learning by accessing the hub and do it yourself. But actually, sometimes some people find it useful to talk things through. So with our lunchtime learning, we talk through topics, and then we give people the opportunity to ask questions in a safe space. And these lunch and learns are delivered by a range of people. So sometimes I deliver them, but we've also had colleagues from our neurodiversity community delivering these sessions. For example, we did a session with our mental health first aiders, which was really, really useful. So the second strand for us is around leadership. And I think, when you think about leadership, clearly there are formal leaders within our organisation, and there's definitely a role for them to role model our values and behaviours as an organisation. And within Qinetiq, we have built in formally to our leadership programme an expectation on them that they will be considering diversity and inclusion in what they do, and they have to evidence it. So every year they have to demonstrate what they've achieved, which I think is quite a useful check and balance to keep track of what's going on. We have a little tracker, which is really powerful. And leaders will pick up on a range of topics on diversity and inclusion, but a number of our leaders have definitely focused on neurodiversity, which has been great, and have run awareness sessions, have been involved in the network, and have run the lunch and learn sessions as well, which has been great. And I think not just running these sessions, but also being actively involved in shaping what we're doing. So actually this morning I had an hour with a couple of our team leaders just talking about how we build aspects of neurodiversity into some of our leadership training, how we consider some of the topics. And it was a really useful insight for me, is to understand their role and what their day-to-day requirements are as leaders. And so I think this piece here around leaders role modelling, but also being actively engaged in the change that we're trying to see, contributing in different ways, I think is really, really key. So the other aspect, I think, is around empowering our employees. And I really want to touch on that, and also more broadly on collaboration and learning. So across our organisation, we have 7 networks, and these cover a range of topics, and one includes neurodiversity. And we also have D&I champions. So each business area also has a champion. And we bring our champions and our network leads together on a regular basis. And I think this is so important because it recognises that aspect of diversity and inclusion, which, sorry to use a jargon word, is intersectionality. And I think this is so, so important when you think about inclusion, is that nobody fits in one neat box. And what we need to do is, when we look at an inclusive culture, is yes, absolutely think about neurodiversity, or think about LGBTQ+, or think about gender. But we also need to think about how we learn. Many of those aspects will have differences, but also similarities. But also, most of our employees might be interested in more than one network. They may, be female and LGBTQ plus and neurodiverse. They may want aspects. So it's really, really important that we collaborate across our networks, across our champions, to learn from each other and spread that shared message and understand some of those differences. We're also really keen to collaborate externally. And I think hopefully I said this from the start, which is, we're really, work in progress on our D&I journey. Our Inclusion 2025 strategy sets out a stall of a direction of travel towards 2025, and then we'll set a new strategy, we'll drive even further and hopefully make even more improvements. But we know there's so much that we can learn from working with others. And here's just some examples of some great organisations that we've been working with to collaborate with and learn. And ENEI, our D&I partner, they're a great organisation that look at all aspects of diversity and inclusion. The Royal Academy of Engineering, I worked with them on a recent D&I programme where we were working and developing toolkits. And actually this has been hugely inspirational for us as an organisation. So we've developed 4 toolkits as an industry group, and they're published on the Royal Academy of Engineering website. They're free to use. They are, I would say this, but I think they're really terrific. But also they're a brilliant approach using toolkits to empower team leaders to have D&I conversations locally rather than everything being from the centre. Is a very powerful way of sharing that message, allowing your leaders to show leadership, decentralising, creating that kind of learning across the organisation. So it's been a fantastic opportunity working with the Royal Academy. DAEDI is the Defence and Aerospace Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Network, and we're just an informal network of similar organisations who just learn and speak together. And we met back in the last week, and we regularly share and celebrate things that we've achieved, but also we ask each other for help and support, because we know that there are many great aspects to running a D&I programme, but there are also some challenges, so incredibly powerful. ICRS is the Institute of Corporate Responsibility and Sustainability. And I think it's worth noting, obviously I'm a corporate responsibility and sustainability professional. We're increasingly seeing that D&I is part of the CRNS portfolio. So often it will sit with the HR function, but we are seeing a trend here where it sits with the CR profession as well. And I think that's really interesting, because many of us will be running community programs and ethics programs, and it's that piece around culture. So again, I think it's really interesting for us to collaborate from that perspective and that lens and share. And then last, but absolutely not least, is NeuroCyber. And obviously I touched at the start on meeting Mike and the team, and obviously meeting Nick and Steph and the others in the group. This group has been fantastic to create that shared learning and that understanding around why neurodiversity is so important, about how it connects with the cyber sector. And I think just working with like-minded individuals to be able to share challenges and opportunities, I think, is incredibly important. I think any organisation that thinks that they can do it on their own is missing out on a fantastic opportunity. So I'd like to touch now on allies. And I think for many in the D&I world, we're very familiar with the concept of allies. And this is very much around, perhaps predominantly through the LGBTQ plus community. And allies are, I think, a really brilliant way of creating a role for those who are not in the core community themselves, but are so passionate about wanting to be inclusive and wanting to support. And I think it's creating that really important space, which is to say, and I think it's something that we use a lot, which is not about us without us. So clearly we want that driver of, what happens in the LGBT community, what happens in the neurodiversity community, to be led by those whose it's their lived experience. They need to have the voice and describe, what they need, their preferences, how they want to engage. But if you don't engage everybody else, there's a missed opportunity for an enormous amount of support and aspects that can be brought out. So like many organisations, we're exploring that sort of broader, wider aspect of allyship, and currently working with our Neurodiversity network and also RISE, our Race and Ethnicity network, to look at how do we create a general allies framework which allows people to be supportive, but respect and understand that lived experience from individuals themselves is really, really key. And our framework, we're basing it around some key themes. And I think it's that advocacy, I think it's about being informed, and that touches on what I was talking about earlier around awareness, which is really learn, understand, talk to individuals, recognize their lived experience. But I think also be really mindful that, and again, I think you've probably heard this often before, which is if we use neurodiversity as an example, if you've met one autistic person, met one dyspraxic person, you've met one person. So when you're being informed, is talk to lots of people, understand their lived experience, do some reading, do some research, and be open to new information, process what it means, check your understanding. I think be yourself, be proud to be you. And I think as you are yourself and you share what makes you, I think it gives people, it creates a safer space for other people to be themselves as well. And I think be visible, be active, be heard. These are just all important aspects which create that incredibly important space for to be supportive in an organisation and be a promoter. So I think you'll probably hear more about this from other organisations as well. I say we are relatively early in our journey, but I think it's something that we should absolutely be exploring. And something else I think is worth sharing as well is new ways of working. I touched on this at the start, related to how we're all coping with through the pandemic and what happens afterwards. Now we're calling it adaptive working, because I think one of the things that we really recognise is that what's happening now will not be the same as what's happening in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. And as an organisation of smart people, we want to be a learning organisation. We want to adapt as we go, get the very best of what we learned from the last year, and think about how we drive that change in the future. And you'll see from the picture there, this is our adaptive working guide, is that absolutely fundamental to how we're going to work is just reinforcing that inclusive culture. And what does it mean? And so we've built that, really thinking about sort of being inclusive, different inclusive ways of working into our thinking for the future. And there's so many facets to this, in the same way that I said at the start with, there is no one aspect, there's no silver bullet to be inclusive. And this is going to be around, as team leaders, how do we run team meetings? How do we make sure that everybody can be heard? How do we allow people to feel safe and included and listened to through this process? And how do we use this to give the very, very best outputs for our customers? And how do we ensure that people are able to achieve that life balance that's really key as well, and their well-being? And you'll see bottom right, one of the expressions that we've been using is preferences. And I think this is where it comes back to the how we work together. I think if you're perhaps in an engineering organisation, quite a task-focused organisation, you'll be thinking very much about the what. So you bring a team together, you've got a goal, you're trying really hard to achieve, the task that you've been set could be customer deliverable. But it's vital right at the start of that process, as you're building that team and you're bringing people together for the first time, or you're introducing new team members, is that you talk about your ways of working. And so often we don't share how we can be at our best. And if you don't tell people, it can be quite hard for them to know. And I think it is essential to have a level of trust. So you need to have created a space where people feel safe to say, actually, this works best for me, but also that pragmatism as a group. So there will be a certain element of veering and hauling. That, for every project, there are going to be slightly different needs, and that we need to try and build in people's preferences the very, very best that we can. And that just shows mine, for full disclosure here. And I use this a lot with my own team, and I use it in other team meetings, which is, if you want to get the very best out of me, please perhaps deal with me in the morning. Maybe don't have high energy meetings. I mean, some people absolutely love that, but for me, I quite like calm and ease. I'm not great being put on the spot for decision making. Now I'm a leader, I have to make decisions, and if put on the spot I will do, but actually if you want a really good decision, you're probably better letting me make decisions in slower time. And I think if you share your preferences, you just at least give people an opportunity to play to your strengths. And what we're trying to do through having these conversations about preferences is to make it more common for people to share their needs and their preferences. And I think this is really, really important when you start to think of things like reasonable adjustments and where people have genuine needs, is that it doesn't come out of nowhere. It's not in a landscape where suddenly somebody needs to be treated differently. Actually, what we're saying is there's a whole spectrum here of how do we play to people's strengths and how do we play to people's best them. And definitely, if you've got a need, it's a need. You know, there is a difference here between preference and need. But I say, if you create this landscape where it's just normal to say, actually, there's some things you can do that make my life a little bit easier, or you can get the very best out of me, I think it will create a safer space. And I think it's important when you're considering, somebody may feel that there's a stigma for coming forward and talking about, you know, some reasonable adjustments or some needs, or it could be that somebody may not have a diagnosis, they may not know that they've got some challenges, but they genuinely know what would make their life easier or whatever. And like, you know, for example, you know, if you find working in an open plan, there's that sort of sensory overload, you want a quiet environment. It could be that you're neurodivergent and that's part of who you are, or it could be that you prefer a quieter working environment. You may not have to explain why it is the case, but you can just say, I would actually prefer a quieter working environment. So again, this discussion around preferences is something that we're trying to build into adaptive working. And it's you know, it's language that we're using, and we're hoping over the next year or so is going to create, as I said, that sort of landscape to really help drive a comfortable, easy space to talk about what we all need. So I think just finally, some next steps for us as an organisation. For us, we are really focused on inclusive culture. And as you adjust and improve and change your culture, it doesn't happen overnight. So as I said, you know, we've got a long-term view. We're going to be doing lots of interventions, lots of changes, and we are going to learn and develop as we go by listening to other organisations, sharing best practice and so on. We're going to continue to raise awareness in our organisation. We're going to help people understand why this is important. We're going to give them the skills and the tools to help them be the best change agents they can. And we'll pick topics that we know are important. So I mentioned earlier that we've been talking about dyslexia. We've run campaigns around autism. This year, we're going to focus on dyspraxia. I think it's one of the areas that perhaps people don't know so well. You know, for anyone who watches Doctor Who, you may remember that there's one of the characters there has dyspraxia. I think it's probably the first time I've ever heard it described on telly. So I think there's a lot more work needed to be done in this space. We're going to continue to work with our leaders and create that guidance and those toolkits, and to help sure that they're really role modelling the best behaviours. We're going to focus on our employee networks, and we're going to continue to work around intersectionality and allies, and really look at how we can create those platforms for those communities to ensure that their lived experience is really, there's a platform for that, but also make sure that there's that wider support. And there's a real role for colleagues who want to be an ally, is how do we support them? Through adaptive working, we're going to be testing different ways. We're going to be looking at how we build inclusion into what we're going to do. And I think just really finally is just keep working with those people who've got best practice or things to share or to learn from their experiences, is to understand what they're doing too and learn from that. So I hope that's been a useful overview in our approach, some of the aspects that we're taking, and thanks. Over to you, Nick.
Thank you so much, Sam. I really, truly enjoyed that presentation. I learned a lot as well. And I'm really looking forward to maybe unpacking some of those things as you maybe send some things out to our attendees afterwards.